with you Terry Blas, Sequentially, this exhibition on comic book illustration. To let you know a little bit about Terry, Terry's a Portland-based comic book artist and writer and illustrator. He created the viral webcomic Latino, and his work has contributed to other comics such as Rick and Morty and Steven's Universe. He received his Bachelor of Fine Arts from PNCA, and we are very excited to have him here today to talk about his work. So please join me in welcoming Terry.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for coming. Clearly, I'm Terry Blas and I do comics. I am very excited to be here because I feel like comics and galleries don't often mix too much, and I'd like to talk a little bit today about why that is, along with showing you some of my work. I think that I'd like to start off with a little story about after I graduated from PNCA, I was asked to contribute to an evening where prospective students were going to come to the college and learn about the programs and see whether or not they were interested in going to the school. I was asked as an alumni to serve as the illustration person that evening, and I had 3 students, prospective students. I noticed that the other departments that were there had 1 each, and I realized, oh, illustration is the fastest growing department at this school, which means it has the most students and is contributing the most tuition to the school. And I thought that was really interesting, and I was talking to my students and telling them about the school. And as the night went on, the person who was also an alumni, they shall not be named, they were, I believe, fine arts representative. And they said, we're now gonna go across the street to a gallery. We're going to go look at some artwork from somebody who graduated from PNCA, and we're going to show the students some of the work that comes out of here. And so as we left the school and headed over there, there was a comic book shop nearby, and my students all wanted to pop in real fast. And I told this person, oh, we're going to stop in here real quick, we'll be there in just a few. And they didn't really like that. They said, well, tonight is about seeing work from a graduate from this school, so we can share that with the students. And I said, there's work in this shop from an alumni, from somebody who graduated from this school, and they just want to see that. And this person said, who? And I said, me. And they didn't really know what to say. I said, well, we'll see you in a few. And we hopped into the comic book shop real quick. I think the difference is a lot of times people recognize or realize that the end result of a comic book is that usually it ends up in a store versus a gallery. And because of that, I think this person considered that their value was less than other types of artwork, but that's something that I've never really understood. I think that today, more and more, institutions are adding comic book-based and themed programs to their rosters, to their academic courses. And I was curious why that is. And the more that I thought about it, the more I thought that, well, as we become a more image-heavy and image-based society or influenced society, I think the interest in comic books has grown. Also, there's an immediacy to comics, which I find exciting. I've done many a convention, and I remember once at a convention, someone passing out pamphlets that were a few columns of text. And when they would hand them out, whoever took it would look at it and kind of shove it in their pocket. Somebody else was handing out photocopies of a comic they had done, which was just 3 panels, like a comic strip. And when they were handed this, everyone who was handed it started reading it immediately. And that to me is exciting because it's almost tricking you into reading more, reading comprehension. I think a comic is a great place for people who are learning English as a second language to be able to pick things up, just like my mom doesn't like me saying this, but I know she learned a lot of English from television. And television, like comics, is giving you a visual and, well, television audio, but comics with a visual text representation. It's giving you more context of what's happening in a scene, which helps with comprehension. So I think that's one reason, one aspect as to why things are, I think, being increased in terms of courses and classes being taught about comics. But they also are this combination of literary and visual art, which I think is really interesting. Because of this, historically, I think a lot of art historians don't know how to classify a comic. That throws them off a bit, as if it's the first time a collaborative art piece has ever been done. So I think that's something that a lot of art historians need to just look past and start attributing to whoever has made this and worked on it. I think that another reason is that because of the media we've been exposed to, especially as kids, a lot of my students where I teach at now are very interested in story and storytelling because of comics and animation. All of them, day one, when I say, well, what has inspired you? What interests you? Miyazaki movies, Studio Ghibli, Cartoon Network, and then they'll rattle off a bunch of comics. But they know they have an interest in this type of story or storytelling, but not a lot of them have been instructed as to how to tell a story or what the fundamentals of story are. And I think with a tiny bit of instruction, with maybe a class on creative writing or how a comic book is written, that's all they would really need to start creating some really profound and interesting work. So I think that for me, teaching students who have an interest in comics is exciting, also because it's nice to see their faces when I tell them, oh, comics aren't written in a specific format every single time, like a movie, right? A movie is written, it has a specific format, it has interior, exterior, this and that. It's all written in this hideous typewriter font that they force you to read. And comics, as long as your editor and your artist understand your script, that's all that matters. So they can be written any way. And I think that's exciting for students and people to learn, because then it eliminates a hurdle that I think a lot of people have when considering making comics. I also think that what I find interesting is, in this country at least, I think we place literature up on a very high pedestal, right? We, as writers, if we're writers, want to write the next New York Times bestseller. We want to write the next great American novel. We also go to museums and respectfully stare quietly at gorgeous paintings, at beautiful artwork. But when you put the two together, suddenly the masses believe that it's entertainment for little children. And I've never understood that. And I think part of that is because people who aren't familiar with comics and comic art largely believe that comics is a genre and not a medium. And that's due in part, I think, to what Marvel and DC are pushing out and pumping out into the film industry right now. And I think that because of that, people believe, oh, comics are about superheroes. But there's plenty of comics that are made that have nothing to do with superheroes. Yeah.
The way you interpret it about the film industry and Hollywood, it's not looking great. But from what I can see of the vision of media and comics is about everything that you put out, everyone puts out.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If I think about some of my favorite movies or shows that are based on comics, then I'm thinking about Ghost World and History of Violence, Road to Perdition, a whole bunch of stories that blue is the warmest color. None of those have anything to do with superheroes, right? They're just stories that are involving romance or thriller or comedy or whatever. It's any story put to words and pictures, sometimes not even words.
Have you ever heard about the Max MAXX?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I think part of what I do with students when I mentor them for their thesis projects, that's another thing I do, Those who are doing comics, I encourage them to, I think the impulse is to put up for their presentation a whole bunch of finished comic book pages to show, like, look at the pretty thing I made, look at the cherry on top, right? And I encourage them to show their script pages, their layouts, their pencils, their inks, their colors, their lettering, et cetera, because when you do that, I think people who have no idea about how comics are made then are given a tiny bit of education as to how collaborative they are, how many steps that there are in the process, and it shows people not necessarily how you draw, but how you work and how you think. And so I think that's an exciting aspect to comics, is learning about how they're made and not just necessarily like the finished end product of what you hold in your hand and read. Comics are also something you can get through fairly quickly, which, for better or for worse, I think is helpful in today's society where social media has destroyed our ability to focus on one task at a time for a long period of time. I remember reading that and thinking, that's not true, that can't be true. And I was working on a comic page, and 5 minutes later, I'm checking my Instagram. And I thought back to being a teenager. I grew up in the 90s, so I didn't have all this. And I would lay down on my floor and draw my sketchbook for like 3 hours and listen to, you know, a Natalie Imbruglia CD. It didn't matter. I could just focus on that and do that for a long amount of time. And comics is something that takes a great deal of focus, a great deal of dedication. And I think training yourself now to be able to have that kind of focus is something that will only help you as a student and as a professional and as a person moving forward in the comic industry and in life. In that case, I wanted to include script pages in this presentation. So in the back, there's notebooks with some script pages, and I wanted you to be able to look through those, read through them, and then as you see on the projections, every once in a while, the pages that correspond to those script pages will pop up on the screen, and you can compare and contrast what has happened from the page to the actual finished product. Throughout here, you're going to see comic book covers, comic book pages, interior pages, and several other things that I think hopefully will help illustrate a little bit more about what comics look like, how comics are made, and I hope that you enjoy it. I'll take any questions anyone might have. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you write comics, you also have drawn comics. As a comic artist, about how many hours a week do you write and draw? Like 80?
It's always a tough question to answer, right? Because if my goal is to write, say my goal is to write 3 pages today, right? Well, one page could have that many panels. And so then I'm writing panel 1. The 2 kids sit in the hallway, and I'm explaining what happens in the panel and what goes where. But the next page could be just a complete 1-panel splash page, and I go, the kids enter the woods, period. And then I wrote a whole page. So it depends on, you know, what you're writing. I try to give myself, if I'm writing a full graphic novel, and that's the meat of my work at that point, I try to give myself the goal of writing at least 5 pages a day. I have challenged myself before to write 15, 20 pages in a day, and I've been able to do it, but I'm also a little nuts. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because I think that obviously drawing a comic, I believe, takes longer than writing it, depending on what you're doing, which is another reason why I began writing comics, because I felt like even if I have an illustration degree, then I know what I don't want to draw in a comic, because I've drawn them. So I know how to write one a little better for another artist who is going to be drawing it. And I thought, well, if I write a comic or a graphic novel and someone else is drawing it, then that means I get to write the next one while they're drawing it, and I feel productive that way. But I remember when I finished college, I was working 40 hours a week at IKEA, and I told myself that I wasn't going to be someone with an expensive illustration degree that I wasn't ever using. And so I gave myself the goal of doing 1 comics page a week. And that didn't sound like a lot, but when you've been putting together like lacquer mom shelves and answering questions about bed frames all day, and explaining to people how to get out of the store, you're tired when you get home. And so you just want to like put your pajamas on and watch your shows and crash, and you can't do that if you want to do a comic, because I realized, oh, I have to write the page, I have to sketch it out, I have to do the pencils, the inks, scan it, clean it up, color it, letter it, prepare the blog post, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought if I can do that, in a year I'm going to have a huge amount of work that I can show at a convention or in a portfolio review, and I'll have created a narrative story in which to do that. So I did that, and what that meant was sacrificing going out with friends, sacrificing time doing other things. If I could have it my way, I would play Stardew Valley all day. I can't do that because I have work I need to put out. So those things serve as my reward for finishing a large amount of work. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
So my question is, and I'm really elementary at this, so it might seem like a silly question, but my question is, could you explain to me what script pages are versus interior pages?
Sure. So a script page is a page that you write that just describes what is going to be seen on the page. And so a script page, you can see some examples in the back of the room later, but they essentially break down like page 1, panel 1, whatever's in that panel, and then the text that is going to go in that panel, panel 2, and then repeat for however many panels you have there.
It's like rough sketches then?
So that's not drawing, it's just completely writing.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like as if you're writing a movie script, but it's for a comic. And then interior pages are just what you refer to when people talk about like versus a cover. They're the pages that you flip through the inside of the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
just that interior.
Yeah,
Oh,
the interior of the
okay.
book. Yeah, sure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the question that probably you think is most important, that the least amount of people ask?
Oh, I love this. I will tell you that the question I get asked the most when I speak to students is, how do you deal with negative criticism online? Which I find very interesting, because my answer is I don't. I mean, I can clap back very well, right? And I have before, but it's not something that I'm concerned, like someone else's opinion of what I do is none of my business. And I try to think about somebody that I really respect, somebody who's very well known, who puts out a lot of work, and I think they don't deal with that. They're busy making cool stuff. And so if I worry about what other, like that could, I don't know who that is. That could be like a 9-year-old kid who's like, you suck. Great. Try making a comic and then we'll talk. So I can't worry about any of that stuff. I, of course, want the people in my life that I'm close with to think that I'm a good person, that I'm hardworking, whatever, but somebody that I don't know, like, there's a famous quote that's like, unless they're paying your bills, pay them no mind. So that's the question I get asked the most. The thing that I don't get asked that I think is the most important is in regards to the balance between being a very skilled and hardworking artist and getting work, and how much of that is actually time management, dedication, productivity, research. In other words, a lot of people, I think, believe that if you can make great drawings, if you can do cool comics, cool, you're going to get a lot of work. But I've seen many a student who can't turn an assignment in on time, or who can't focus. And I tell my students, when you're done with class, when you're done with school, you're competing with everybody in the room, including me, for comic book jobs. And if you can't turn something in on time, they're going to go to somebody who can. Because when I wrote for Marvel, in my script pages, would write out the layouts for the panels. In other words, like panels 1 and 2 are side by side on the first row, panel 3 is along horizontal, et cetera, et cetera. I would describe how I wanted the page to look. And the editor said, yeah, don't do that. And previously, I would tell my editors, that's just the best way I have to get it out of my head and onto a page. If you as the editor and the artist have a better way, I don't care, as long as the dialogue, the story still makes sense. But this editor was like, don't do that, just let the artist do it. And I said, well, what if I know that like, I want the last panel on the page to be the biggest for emotional impact or for an establishing shot? She was like, you can say that, but you don't have to explain the entire thing. And I thought, I didn't tell her this, but I thought, well, that's what takes me the longest amount of time. So now, I'm going to be able to write this comic in half the time. If I don't tell her that, but I turn in all of my scripts 2 days early, that means she gets to turn them into the editor-in-chief 2 days early, and now she looks really good to her boss, which is what got me more work writing for Marvel. So I think that you can make okay artwork, but if you're super professional, if you're on time, if you're polite, if you're, you will get more work with that than create. Marjane Satrapi, who wrote Persepolis and drew Persepolis, she did a famous interview where she said, I can't draw, but I drew a whole comic, but I can't draw. But she's intelligent, she had something to say, and she was hardworking. And so that's what I feel like I would get asked more if, if people were considering sort of those aspects, I think, of working in the comic book industry. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?
Can you just tell Mike about what's going on May 17th here at Community College and that you're going to be here again?
What's going on with what?
Compose?
Oh, sure. So there is... Clackamas Community College holds the Compose Conference, which is a great creative writing, is it just a day? A great day, where there's panels and workshops, different authors and writers and artists are here talking about their process and about their work and their books. It's something that everybody should go to, especially if you're interested in comics and in storytelling or in creative writing in any kind of capacity. I believe it's in May 17th. I will be here, so if you want to hear me talk again, if you haven't gotten enough, I will also be here speaking during Compose. It's fun, I've done it before, it's a really good event.
Thank you, Terry.
Of course, thank you. Yeah.
I gotta say, Terry, every time I listen to you talk, I learn something new about comics. So I love listening to you talk. So I only told my whole class, you're assigned to go to Compose on the 17th of May. All right, so another question I might ask. You mentioned pencil and ink, and that's kind of a traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you use digital tools?
For the sake of speed, and I like to get things done quickly, I use mostly digital tools now when I make comics. So digital inking, digital layouts. The thing that's good about that is if you mess up your inking, you can Command Z, right? As opposed to an ink splatter on your page that you have to then white out carefully. I still love doing comics traditionally. Sometimes if I'm just doing a short comic for myself, I might draw it on paper or do a combination of the two. But yeah, a lot of it is now done on my Cintiq or my iPad. And so it's digital penciling, digital inking. I use Procreate and Clip Studio, Photoshop a little bit, but it's mostly digital. Yeah.
So is there absolutely no more market for doing it the old-fashioned drawing?
Oh, I don't think that's true. No, I know plenty of people who still do it traditionally and do really great work that way and prefer to do it that way as well. The good thing about doing it traditionally is that then you have a physical object you can sell. So, yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yep. Sure.
What do you wish you had learned at the beginning?
Oh. I don't know, many things. I guess one thing I could think of is what I was speaking about before in regards to the balance between being a great artist and being a professional, hardworking person. I wish I'd known that at the beginning. I think I've generally been a hardworking person throughout my life, but I would have worried less about creating a perfect page of comics. And I have a saying that done is better than perfect. I know people who I graduated with who haven't created hardly any artwork since they left school, over 15 years ago, because they're worried it's not going to look great. And it's like, well, but then you don't have anything, and nothing's perfect. So if you just make something and it's not great, well, whatever, move on and try to make the next thing a little bit better. I'd rather have a book to give to someone that's not perfect than nothing at all. Yeah?
When you were first started,
You're good.
when you first started drawing comics, do you have any tips for just learning to draw like human forms and shading? Did you look at like, I know me personally, I just like copy a bunch of superheroes that I like and then hope that I can translate that to like maybe my own superheroes I come up with or characters that I've repeated things about.
The best advice I think I can give is I would look up the artist Natalie Noragat. She's a Portland-based artist who did a lot of comics and then went on to storyboard and direct for Disney. She's a good friend of mine. What she did that really upped her game was she would take a sketchbook and a cup of coffee and sit at the window in Powell's and draw every single person that passed by. It doesn't allow for you to have a photo and sit and look and copy. You have to train yourself to quickly grasp the feeling, the visual look of somebody that is going to be gone in just a few seconds. So drawing from life, a lot of artists who want to level up that way go to the zoo, draw animals from life. So just drawing people and animals, in fact, if you apply to like the animation program at Cal Arts, it says, their portfolio says, people and animals drawn from life. That's all it says. That will help you more than anything. Yeah.
I'm actually writing about this.
Oh, great.
For somebody who's not trying to learn the basics of comics, but the basics of drawing, who doesn't really even know where to start, what would you say to practice?
I would definitely say what I just said, but the other thing that I feel helps more than anything, for me in my drawing, if I go back and forth between a couple different styles. Most of my comic work is very cartoony. If I'm drawing a portrait of someone or a painting, I like it to look more realistic or like an actual likeness of the person. The thing that I find helps most with drawing and drawing accurately is to picture things on like an XY axis, and it's why people, when they're drawing, you usually see them going like this with a pencil. Because if you're drawing a picture of a person and the picture's like this, people will still draw their eyes straight on when really they're at an angle. So if you picture things on that axis, you can then begin to measure where does the eye hit the chin, where does the ear line up, and that helps. That's why people also sometimes use a graph. I don't necessarily love using a graph because I want to train myself to trust my instincts when I'm drawing, but I think that alone will help as well.
I was wondering, what made you want to do like comics specifically? Because I know personally I'm a person who loves art but can't really choose a path. So what made you stick to comics?
Comics were the best way I found to tell the stories I wanted to tell. I love animation. I thought I was gonna draw cartoons. And then when I started doing animation, I was like, oh, I don't like drawing this. Almost the same exact thing over and over and over again. You do a portion of that in comics, but you're more in control, especially if you're just making them for yourself, of what you're gonna show. So for me, it was largely about storytelling. I got my illustration degree because I liked drawing. But then when I was doing interior comic book pages and cover work, I was reminded that I don't like drawing buildings, I don't like drawing cars, I don't like drawing bikes. If Marvel was like, will you draw the next issue of Spider-Man, he's gonna be swinging through Manhattan, I'd be like, no thank you. But I love drawing people, and I love drawing animals, portraits, so I had to have a difficult conversation with myself. I wasn't putting myself down, but I thought, what are my artistic limitations? I either can study really hard and level up my drawing abilities to learn to love that stuff, but if I still want to work in comics and I'm not doing that, what do I do? And I thought, well, the whole reason I started drawing as a kid, I wasn't just drawing pictures, I was like drawing characters and then making up a story for them. I was like, well, that sounds like writing. So I thought, well, maybe I could try that. I think I have good ideas and good characters that I've come up with. So I couldn't go back to school because I didn't have the money or the time, right? But while I was drawing comics, I was watching movies I'd seen a million times, listening to podcasts I'd already heard, and I thought I can utilize my time better. And I made YouTube my second college degree, and I looked up every writing tutorial I could find on comics, writing tutorials on movies, anatomy of story, script writing. That led me to books that I thought were helpful, and I thought, yeah, I'm gonna give this a shot. And then I started writing, and that's when my career moved a lot faster in comics. So I'm also not trying to deny what the universe is telling me to do, right? I'm not gonna say, but I really wanted to draw comics. I still draw plenty. But if that's what's going to get me more work, I'm not gonna deny that. I would suggest, if you don't know what avenue to sort of go into, I would try making a comic anyway, because the thing that I've told my students is that having a variety of skills is what is going to help you moving into the art world, because there are times when I didn't have any work drawing comics, but someone approached me and was like, hey, I need a colorist. And because I had spent that year writing, penciling, inking, coloring, I had built up different skills. And like coloring, some people hate it. I think it's really therapeutic, and it feels like an adult coloring book, and I can just sit on the couch with my iPad and color a whole comic page for someone. Great. So, you know, you might find an area that you really are drawn towards, and hopefully that could help a little bit. Yeah.
What comic, like, that you've read has inspired you most?
Oh, geez. Okay, well, there's several. Yes, please, I don't want to keep you if you need to leave. The first ones that inspired me, because I was 12 when it premiered, was like the X-Men cartoon of the 90s, then led me to X-Men comics. And those led me to other superhero comics. So those inspired me quite a bit, but getting into comics then led me to the Bone series by Jeff Smith. And I loved that it was essentially, oh, this is like Uncle Scrooge meets Lord of the Rings. And I loved like the hybrid idea of that. My favorite TV show growing up was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I was like, oh, this is comedy, action, and horror. So I've never liked just one type of story. I want there to be lots of different aspects to it. It's also the reason I love Star Trek, because you could get one episode where they're like Sherlock Holmes in the holodeck, and then the next one is all about like race, right? So Bone by Jeff Smith really influenced me, and then Scott Kurtz's PvP comic, which was, I believe, the first comic to be serialized on the internet. He wrote, along with Dave Kellett, wrote the book How to Make Webcomics, because they were the first two people to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Of course. Yeah.